Today, we're going to be learning about how to multiply rational numbers. So when I'm talking about rational numbers, I'm talking about integers, decimals, and fractions. So before we jump into actually multiplying rational numbers, we're going to look at some of the ways that multiplication is actually represented in math. So sometimes in math, we represent multiplication using the times symbol. And so what that might look like is A times B. So that symbol is going to look like an X. Sometimes we use a multiplication dot. So we would use A times B, what looks like that. Or sometimes we use parentheses where we put the numbers in parentheses next to each other. That can also mean multiplication. So it's important to understand the different ways that multiplication is represented because all the resources out there are going to use different representations. And then the other words that are important to understand when we're multiplying are the vocabulary words that talk to us about the different parts of a multiplication problem. So the first vocabulary term is going to be factor. A factor is just the number that's being multiplied together. So you're going to have at least two factors in order to do multiplication. So in the examples with the symbols, A and B would be our factors. And then product is the number you get from multiplying factors together. Basically, your product is just a fancy way of saying, or a mathematical way of saying, the answer to a multiplication problem. Now we're going to look at the rules for multiplying rational numbers. So the first rule for multiplying rational numbers is that you're going to if you're multiplying two factors with the same sign, then the product is going to be positive. So for example, if I am multiplying A times positive B, my product will just be a positive AB, or whatever A times B is. So for example, if I have positive 1 times positive 1, my product's going to also be positive 1. Now that still works if I have the same signs, that still works for negative numbers. So if I have negative A times negative B, my answer is going to still be positive A times B. So if I have negative 1 times negative 1, my answer is actually going to be positive 1. Negative times negative is also going to give me a positive 1. So whenever I'm multiplying two factors with the same sign, the product will be positive. The second rule is if you multiply two factors with different signs, the product will be negative. So, for example, if I have A times negative B, that product will be negative AB. So if I put it in terms of ones, if I have 1 times negative 1, I'm going to get negative 1 as my product. So same thing, if my A was negative, I have negative A times B, then my answer is still going to be negative A times B. So again, if my first number is negative and my second number is positive, so negative 1 times positive 1, my answer is still going to be negative 1. Because if I'm multiplying two factors with different signs, meaning one's positive, one's negative, then the product is going to be negative. So let's look at examples of how that kind of works out. So for the first set of examples on the We Do page, we have questions 1 through 10. A strategy that some people may find helpful to use is sometimes I like to color code. I did this with my adding integers video as well. Is kind of color coding which problems are the same signs and which problems are different signs. That kind of helps me kind of focus on one rule at a time if I need to. So when I go through, I'm going to circle any problem right now in pink that has the same sign, saying both factors are positive or both factors are negative. So that's number 2, number 4, 5, 6, and 8. So when I go to multiply, again, I'm just multiplying as normal. It's just about determining what the sign of the product is. So negative 7 times negative 8 would be positive 56. Negative 1 times negative 2 would be positive 2. Negative 9 times negative 9 would be positive 81. Going over number 6, negative 4 times negative 5 would be positive 20. In number 8, you have negative 7 times negative 7, which would be positive 49. So now going into my second kind of type of problem, the rest of them should be different signs, meaning I have a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive. Either way, all of these answers should be negative. All my products should be negative. So I have, if I start with number 1, I have 12 times negative 10, which should be negative 120. In number 3, I have negative 14 times 6, which would be negative 84. In number 7, I have negative 11 times 14, which should be negative 154. In number 9, I have negative 11 times 3, which would be negative 33. And lastly, number 10 is negative 13 times 5, which is negative 65. So those are the examples for multiplying integers, meaning we're talking about our positive and negative whole numbers in both directions. So if you look down, I have also examples on multiplying decimals and fractions that are positive and negative numbers. So as a reminder, when you're multiplying decimals, what you like to do is essentially ignore the decimals and kind of multiply as normal. And then you're going to count how many place values there are to the right of the decimal in total. So what I mean by that is, here's a decimal. I have only one number that's to the right of the decimal. So I only have one place value to the right of the decimal in total. So this next number is just a whole number. So if I have I might just put like a 1 off to the side because that's going to help me at the end of the problem. So when I'm multiplying, I have a negative times a positive, which means my answer should be negative. And then I'm going to ignore kind of, instead of saying 1.7 times 3, I'm going to think about it as 17 times 3, which is 51. Now, the answer is not negative 51. That's where this 1 kind of comes into play. Because there is one place value to the right of the decimal, that means that I have to take my decimal and move it to the left once in my answer. So my final answer should be negative 5.1. Okay. So if we look at this second example, I have a negative times negative, so my answer is going to be positive. So I'm going to focus again on, I'm going to think of this more as 35 times 2 right now. So 35 times 2 is 70. And then again, I'm going to look at back to the original problem. I have two numbers that are to the right of the decimal, or two place values in total that are to the right of the decimal. That means I'm going to pretend like my answer is 70, but what I'm really going to do is I'm going to take the decimal place and I'm going to move it to the left 2 times. So my final answer would be 0.7 or 7/10 would be my final answer, and it would be positive because I'm multiplying two numbers with the same sign. With fractions, there's a lot of different ways that you can multiply. For me, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of, instead of simplifying ahead of time, I'm going to multiply as normal, meaning you're going to multiply your numerator times your numerator and your denominator times your denominator. So I have 3/8 times negative 5/12. I have a positive times a negative, so my answer is going to be negative. So when I multiply my numerators, I get 3 times 5, which is 15. My denominators, I have 8 times 12, which is 96. I always need my answers in simplest forms. So if I go ahead and simplify this, I know 3 goes into both numbers. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 96 divided by 3 is 32. So my answer should be negative 5/32. And then with our last example on the we do section, I have a mixed number times a mixed number. I have a negative times a negative. So my answer is going to be positive. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to first convert these to improper fractions. So negative 2 1/4 is really negative 9/4. And then I have negative 1 2/3 is really negative 5/3. I'm going to go ahead and multiply again my numerators and my denominators. So I get 45 twelfths, which can simplify. 3 goes into 45 15 times. 3 goes into 12 4 times. So I have 15/4. If you convert that to a mixed number, you have 3 3/4. So depending on how your teacher might like your answer could be 15/4 or 3 and, oops, or 3 and 3/4. And again, my answer is positive because I'm multiplying a negative times a negative, two numbers with the same sign. So on the last page are you-do problems. So be sure to look at your notes as you need to for help, and then check with your teacher for the answers. I hope you enjoyed learning how to multiply rational numbers with me, and good luck.